Welcome back to another episode. I'm really glad that you're tuning in because today we talk about the Vikings. The mysterious men of the north who terrorized and actually had a pretty big impact on the British Isles and its surrounding territory. And you can bet that I'm excited for this episode because once again we're talking about my favorite historical period, the Middle Ages. In this episode we're going to look at the history of Vikings, I'm going to break down some common misconceptions you all have about Vikings, and I'm going to give you the truth about Vikings in a very simple and digestible way. If you're new here, my name is Cosden and this is Vlogs of Knowledge, a history show where every single week you get a dose of history. If you're not subscribed, make sure that you are and click the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. Vikings have been popular for some time now. It seems like we always hear tales about their barbaric invasions, their unwarranted violence, and their numerous raids. And while that certainly was a part of Viking culture, it turns out it only made up a small percentage. Vikings, contrary to what people believe, were very ordinary people. They were traders, just like everyone else. They were active in what we now call the Viking Age, which was a period of about 300 years where the Vikings expanded to Europe and even went as far as Canada. But before we get into the history, as always, let's put all this in historical context and get some background. The Middle Ages are said to have begun around the 5th century AD with the fall of the Roman Empire and lasted all the way up to the 15th century AD with the coming of the Renaissance, so that's about 1,000 years of history. The Middle Ages, for the most part, well at least in Europe, are characterized by little innovation, disease, war, and of course, the rise of Christianity. Around the 5th century, Christianity was becoming mainstream and started to take Europe by force. It became the main religion, and anything else was seen as pagan, something wrong and barbaric. And it's really important to remember this detail because at the time there were only two real options. Either you were a Christian or a pagan. It was very binary. By the 8th century, Christianity had become so mainstream that it was pretty much all over Europe except for the Scandinavian countries of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. And that's important because that's where the Vikings were. But keep in mind that this was way before we had any sort of unified country system. Like Denmark, Norway, and Sweden were not countries, they were just territories. And there you will find what we now call Vikings, except if you were to look at it from a distant perspective, you would be pretty surprised because it would be a little different than what you would expect. They were simple farmers who got by from agriculture and fishing. They were pagan, they believed in their own gods, and they lived a relatively simple life. For the most part, that was their life. It was pretty simple and it was pretty basic. They just kind of did their own thing. But towards the end of the 8th century, something changed. They started to travel, they started to go in different territories, and to steal their riches. We don't exactly know what changed, but something did. Maybe the situation at home wasn't so good anymore. Maybe it was agriculture, maybe it was overpopulation. We don't really know. All that we know is that they started exploring, they started raiding, and they started stealing people's riches. They decided that it was time to move on, to try something new, to explore different territories, and maybe even build a better life elsewhere. And since Scandinavia is so close to the British Isles of England, Ireland, and Scotland, well, that was the easiest place for them to go. So in 793, we have the very first Viking raid. They attacked the Christian monastery off the coast of England, took its treasures, and left. The monastery was a very easy target because, well, first of all, the monks were unarmed, they were very easy to deal with, and the monastery was on the coast. You didn't have to go that much inland to get the treasures. You could just park your boat on the shore, get the treasures, and then leave. That monastery was not the only one though. Actually, England had a lot of these monasteries off the coast that were left unprotected. And they didn't really protect these monasteries because they never expected somebody to attack them. But the Vikings, well, they were different. This attack shook the Christian world. Like, it was barbaric and it was unorthodox. Who really would attack a Christian monastery? Remember that at the time, Christianity was everywhere and people absolutely believed in it. Like, for somebody to attack a Christian monastery, he had to be out of their mind. Like, it's something that you never hear of. Like, nobody attacks a Christian monastery in the Middle Ages. The only people who could potentially attack a Christian monastery were pagans, people who did not believe in the Christian God. So the Christian victims, shocked, they started to write books and stories about the events that took place in 793. They demonized these Vikings and largely exaggerated the facts that actually went down, which is why whenever we think about Vikings, we tend to think of them as barbaric, when in fact they weren't actually so bad as people make them out to be. The truth is that the Vikings are not really as violent as we think they are. Like, all they wanted was the treasures. They just wanted to get treasures and leave. What we have is really people exaggerating the facts and exaggerating the story. You've probably heard that history is written by the victors, right? The people who win wars, who win important events, are usually the ones who tend to write history afterwards. And while that's true, generally for the most part, sometimes history is written by the victims. And when you're a Christian who's a victim of a Christian attack by pagans, well, you're gonna be hurt, right? And this is your Christian God, the God that you believed in all your life, and a pagan just disrespected that and completely attacked a Christian monastery. Like, you're gonna be hurt. So when you write about the events that took place, you're gonna want to exaggerate because you're gonna want to demonize the other person. It's just human nature. When we're hurt, we tend to exaggerate the facts and really make the other person look bad when in fact they weren't really as bad as we thought. The Vikings soon realized that, hey, wait a minute, this is actually profitable. We should keep raiding because these monasteries monasteries are unprotected and we can just take the riches and take them for ourselves. Like, nobody was defending it. It was like holding up a sign that says, please come and rob me, I have treasures. And while the monasteries were not quote-unquote rich, they did have enough that was worth it for the Vikings to come and steal. And for a few decades, that's what the Vikings did. They were mostly small-scale attacks involving only a few men. They came for the treasures and then they left. Their intention was always to get the treasure. It was never to destroy the monastery or to kill as many people as they can. Unfortunately, that's what usually ended up happening. Because the monks, even though they were unarmed, even though they pretty much had nothing really to fight with, they still gave them a fight. You're not going to let the Vikings just come and take your treasures without offering some sort of defense, right? You're at least going to try, right? Like, at least try. Around the year 850, however, things started to change. They realized that it was too time-consuming to keep going back and forth between Scandinavia and the British Isles, so instead they decided to settle. Because if they settle, they don't actually have to go back to Scandinavia. They can just go back to their home base, to their settlement, regroup, refresh, and then just keep pushing on forward and get even more treasures. They settled in Scotland, they made fortified ports in Ireland, they founded the city of Dublin, and they even came with a huge army to the island of England. The Vikings had come out of nowhere and they successfully took over a large part of the United Kingdom. Like, this was crazy, this happened so fast. Being traders from back home, that's what they started to do here. Like, they were still conducting raids here and there, but it was a lot more profitable to trade. They made trade routes around Europe, all the while defending themselves against the up-and-coming forces of the British Army. Because when you invade a territory and you start to trade within it, like, you're not gonna get away with it without some sort of fight, right? Like, the people that were there, you've invaded their territory. They're gonna fight back, they're gonna build an army, and they're gonna fight you and try to kick you out. People rebelled, and these rebellions went on for a few decades, and these battles were actually pretty difficult for the Vikings. The Vikings were very good at raids, and they were specifically good at naval battles, but it wasn't too long before England got some ships of their own and gave the Vikings a run for their money. Eventually, the Vikings lost and they were kicked out of England once and for all, and then England, for the first time ever, was united under one kingdom. And actually, this is around the time where the history of the British royal family begins, and if you've seen my video on the royal family, then you know exactly what happened next. However, that's not the entirety of the Viking expansion. They also made it to France, they made it to Iceland, they made it to Greenland, and even made it to Canada. When they realized that making a settlement was a lot more profitable than raiding, they wanted to settle in more places than just England and the British Isles. They first found Iceland, they made a settlement there, which by the way is why Iceland is so similar to the Scandinavian countries. Then they heard a rumor of a bigger island to the west, so they went there, they found Greenland, and they made another big settlement there. And finally, somebody told them of an even bigger island even more to the west, so they got their ships, set sail, and eventually reached Canada. Now, up until the 1960s, we always thought that Christopher Columbus was the first European to reach the American continent, but then we realized that, hey, the Vikings were actually there 500 years before. That Viking settlement in the American continent did not last too long because the local Indians, they were so aggressive, they just kicked them out. And plus, the Vikings were very far away from home. Like, it's hard to have a successful settlement if you're so far away from home. Your chances actually decrease the further away you are. So there you have it, the Vikings in a nutshell. They weren't really as barbaric as we thought, and they were really just ordinary people who just wanted to get rich. Like, if you really think about it, that's really it. They just wanted to get rich. They never wore helmets with horns, and they were just regular people who happened to have a big influence on the British Isles, and I guess the entire world, right? Because if anything, they just make for really great stories. I really hope that you've enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please leave it a big thumbs up, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. And of course, it does help me out a lot because it shows me that you enjoy my content and that you want to see future videos. And now it's time for questions. What did you know about Vikings before this video? And has this video changed your opinion on Vikings in any way? Please do let me know. I would love to read and answer all of your comments, and if you do, bonus points for you. You might get featured next week's video as a fan of the week. As you know, and as I say at the end of every video, I haven't talked about everything, and the things that I did talk about, I haven't gone into too much detail. That's okay, I'm actually doing this on purpose because I want you guys to go out and research more on your own. My name has been Cosden. You can follow me on social media. The links will be in the description. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I will see you all next week.